Well, Shelby, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me. This is fantastic.
Yay. We're gonna have so much fun because you're a podcast host. I'm a podcast host. You like to talk. I like to talk. It's gonna be fun. As I was telling you, we're gonna start with a little lightning round. So favorite books. Did you have a favorite book that really helped you early recovery?
Well, I think my favorite book is Laura McGowan's We Are the Luckiest. I also liked Sober Diaries, and I like Holly Whitaker's book as well for a couple of different reasons. None of those books were out when I got sober. There was no such thing as Quit Lit, but I've really embraced the concept over the last 5 years.
Very good. But what about when you first got sober?
I mean, I got sober in AA, so the big book was our book,
Yeah, I know. And you got sober, what, 20 years ago?
Yeah, I celebrated 20
there
years
wasn't
in July.
There wasn't a lot out back then.
We didn't have much of anything. We didn't have Facebook groups. There was no internet. I mean, there really wasn't much. So like, it was really go to 12-step or nothing, right?
It really was. Yeah, that is the truth. Yeah, I love that. I had both Laura McGowan and Claire Pulley on the podcast. Their
Same.
books, their books are just so, I mean, it's just so nice to hear like the new generation coming out and talking about how they got sober. And I know Claire didn't do 12 steps, so it's nice to hear all perspectives. That's pretty cool.
Really
cool. Do you have a favorite quote or mantra that you live by? Maybe a cliche, like one day at a time?
I think that what I typically say to myself, and it's in my book actually, is nothing worth doing is easy. Ooh. That to me just kind of encompasses all of it. You know, I mean, if we're gonna do something and it's worth our time and energy, it certainly isn't going to be easier most of the time, or it certainly won't.
That is the truth, right? I love that. Do you have a regular self-care practice, or do you think about like a daily routine, a weekly routine?
I have all of that. My best routine, I think, and the most consistent and beneficial to me, I think, is my morning routine, which is pretty well established and keeps getting longer and longer. That is my favorite thing. I get up very, very early in the morning, and I have a pretty lengthy routine that I love and I don't deviate from because it makes me feel good. And it's also predictable and kind of gives me that insurance policy that I've kind of done that, make that check mark, right? That mental check. Also, I love just good skincare. I think that's really important. And I use like some really natural wellness types of products that I make myself that are very full of nutrients and wonderful things that I just can create into a little bit of like a spa routine, which takes 2 minutes, right? And is not very expensive. So it's very accessible to anybody.
What do you do in your morning routine? Is it like prayer, meditation, reading inspirational books?
Yeah, a little bit of all that. So I get up early in the morning, I come downstairs, I have my coffee, I sit in the same spot on my couch, and I read for about 15, 20 minutes. I'm kind of a slowish reader, so I read at least 10 pages of some kind of a nonfiction book. I also use Mel Robbins' High Five Journal to help me put down some things. I'm not a big journaler. It's not really my favorite thing as far as free writing, but this one I feel, first of all, I love Mel Robbins. She's my favorite. And also I feel like it's a little bit, it's prompted, you know, so I feel like I can come up with some things, and that helps me to kind of organize some of my thoughts and really the desires of my heart or goals that I might have, and then action steps towards those. I definitely do a lot of prayer and a little bit of meditation, and then I go do some sort of physical activity, either jog with my husband and my dogs, or I go to the gym.
Awesome, man. There's nothing like exercise to get your endorphins and your brain chemistry right.
For sure.
And the meditation. How long do you meditate for? Is it like a half hour, 15 minutes?
I'm more like 5 to 10. Okay. I have in that space anyway, just because, you know, it's time sensitive, right? But, and other times of the day or other periods of the week, I do try to incorporate, especially at night. In the evening, I love my like sleep meditation. I use some guided sleep meditation, and then also just sleep sounds that I just kind of put in. To me, it's very meditative. I just get that on Spotify and it's free. I kind of just search up like sleep sounds, and it really helps me. I put my earphones in and just kind of lay there while I kind of let go of all the thoughts of the day and kind of let go of the tension, tightness in my body. So yeah.
I discovered Michael Seeley does sleep meditations. It's more like he calls it sleep hypnosis, but
Nice.
for the entirety of my relationship with my husband, I met him almost 30 years ago. He has always fallen asleep before me. And then I started doing this sleep hypnosis thing. And now I fall asleep before him. I like
Nice.
retrain my brain to fall asleep faster. So I love those. There's so many resources out there. It's crazy.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Sleep hygiene is important.
So important.
Yeah, right. Do you still go to meetings weekly?
I do sometimes, not very often. Sometimes I get asked to chair them. So I always say yes. When I can't, I make myself available. I recently did something cool on Facebook. I think it was called Recovery 2.0. It's not AA affiliated, but it was
Tommy
something
Rosen. I just interviewed him.
Yeah, so very similar, and I really enjoyed it. It was so fun because there was like some crosstalk and stuff, which was just new and different. I very, very much enjoy meetings, but I feel like with my private practice and then online stuff, I am immersed in recovery all the time. So I do get my fill.
Yeah, I hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. What's one thing you wish you knew when you first got sober?
Oh gosh, I wish I knew that you could feel like you were at the end of your drinking even when you were years sober. So I call that like a sober bottom. It's a term I use. That first happened to me that I'm aware of anyway. It was at year 4. And I found myself in a place that was really uncomfortable. I was in a lot of pain. I was very overwhelmed. I had all the tools and resources. I was very, very involved in the program, but I didn't really feel like using them anymore. I think I wanted to turn my back. I didn't really feel connected. I felt very lonely and sad, and I was miserable, but here I was involved in this 12-step program pretty well and doing the things, quote unquote, supposedly anyway, doing the things that I was supposed to be doing. But I felt like I was sort of towards the end of my drinking there. And so I don't think anybody talks about that enough around the rooms, that just because you're sober doesn't mean that you're well. And we really do need to do that work around emotional sobriety to continue our efforts to get well. In whatever form that looks like for you. It comes in a variety of forms. And often, as we stay 1 to 5 years sober, we need a lot different things than we did in the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. It's often the things that you do in the beginning aren't really the things that are going to keep you sober long term.
No.
Yeah, we do evolve. It does become kind of rote if you don't evolve and change it up a little bit.
Right. And I feel like this is the space that's where I love to meet women, is in that 1 to 5 year time, because there's this awakening that starts happening. I mean, people start to kind of wake up to themselves. I hear from women, I'm sure you do too. I don't even know who I am anymore. I mean, what do I like? Who am I? What do I want? And those are things that are really difficult to think about in the first part of recovery, because you're just trying to figure out how to live life sober. I mean, that's hard enough for a good year. And so in that next phase of I think sobriety, it's kind of an awakening.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. Yeah, we really do need to talk about that more. And you know what? It's painful, but pain is the touchstone of all growth, right? Like that's, when we really hitting those bottoms are typically like pivotal points, right? Like when you reach those painful places, it's like I have to dig deeper, do something different. And
for sure. I mean, it's our greatest motivator, right? I mean, why would we do anything if we weren't? It's kind of like work, would anybody really work if they didn't have to? I mean, it's kind of like that. I mean, if we all just had millions of dollars in the bank, I mean, would anybody do anything? Probably not. I mean, some people might, but it's the same for us emotionally. I mean, we have to step into that next level. And often we don't always know what it is. And that's why we need good people in our life to help guide us and show us what that is, what that looks like.
It's so funny. I read this article recently where they were talking about motivation. I'm like a behavior researcher at heart, I think. And I came across this piece of data that said people will do a lot more to keep $100. Wait, what's the saying? So people won't do a lot to get $100, but they'll do a lot to prevent losing it. Like the fear of loss is a greater motivator than the pull to gain something.
I get that.
Yeah. So fear of loss that's a thing. We can use that to our advantage because we see that all the time in the rooms, right? People, relapse. And then those of us that are witnessing it, we're like, whoa, it's time to get busy because I don't want to lose my sobriety. Right.
That's right.
I've been asking people lately to share their spiritual experience stories.
Mm.
I don't know if I prepped you. I don't think I prepped you for this before. So I can offer you one if you need a minute to think about it. But I think it's so important for people to sort of come to their own decision about, what a higher power is, what it means
Mhm.
to them, like define it for
Mhm.
themselves as best they can. Did you have any experiences? They say that experience is like the best
Mhm.
evidence, right?
Sure.
Did you have any experiences with a sort of a higher power moment where you realized, wow, there really is
Mhm.
something, or you felt that connection?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's something that we all do need to be discussing a little bit more because, spirituality gets a bad rap, and I think immediately when people use that word, they go right to religion, right? I hear that a lot,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's not what it is.
Right.
And I really feel like a big part of my work and calling is to help educate people on that. We all are spiritual beings. We have that still small voice inside of us, and we can connect with spirituality in such a variety of forms, whether it's nature or through creativity, or if it is a biblical God. I mean, none of those things are bad or wrong. And oftentimes, what I see a lot in my private practice a lot lately, and also, of course, in the rooms and everywhere else, is people really struggle with spiritual trauma, and it
Oh,
and
yeah.
it really clouds their view and ability to even consider this. I've seen this very often, and it saddens me so much,
I know,
because
me
what people
too.
do in the name of God or Jesus is so harmful to people, because that's not even that's not the God I know.
Mm-mm.
And that's even in a biblical sense. But what it's done to people, especially from a young age, and how they're spoken to, can damage them for so long. And I know people are doing what they think is the best at the time. So for me, I feel like I was raised in a religious faith, I guess, but very loose, like none. Like, we called ourselves this thing, right? But like, we weren't practicing. And so I came to learn a little bit more about a Christian God later in life. I kind of was seeking that out. I was really interested and curious. But it wasn't until I got sober, and actually I was in rehab, and I went to this beautiful rehab in my area. It's kind of like a luxurious place on a river here in Maryland. And I did not want to be there. I wasn't like the person who was screaming out saying, I need help, I need to go to treatment. That wasn't my story at all. I didn't think I needed to be there or belonged there, frankly. And so for the first 2 weeks, I really spent most of my time kind of saying why I didn't belong there. And I was crying. I never even unpacked my bags. I assumed somebody was going to come get me, because surely they had made a mistake. And, that never happened. So I turned 27 in rehab. And on my birthday, which was about 2 weeks in, I was outside along the river on this kind of grass, that was just beautiful. It was this like stunning kind of area. And I can remember really having some kind of spiritual awakening for the first time. And what I mean by that is really a feeling of surrender. Like, that was the first time I felt like I don't know what I said or what I did. It was a long time ago, but I just remember the feeling of either it was asking or just a letting go of my own self, where I felt a change. I felt like, okay, I'm really going to turn my life and my will over to the care of this God, because I don't know what else to do. And I think I was just submitting myself to this facility, right? To this treatment center, to this program, because I didn't see it that I had any other choice. Because by 2 weeks in, you've had a little education, probably feeling a little better. I was kind of crazy. You take the alcohol out and then you're left with yourself. And when you're in treatment, you're not allowed, at least in mine, we had no phones, TV, nothing, no newspaper. There was nothing. So I was a nut. So I just ran on the treadmill for 2 hours a day and like was going crazy. So at that moment, I think I was able to truly surrender in the best way that I could at that time at 2 weeks sober, right? So that was my first, I would call it, spiritual experience. I think from there on, I had many women that came into my life through the rooms that were really good spiritual guiders, and I was really grateful for that. I did get connected to some other more formal spiritual programs through like church and things, which really worked for me. I mean, and that was the way I was able to connect with a God of my understanding that is a very loving God. That's different than the one I was sort of presented with as a young person. That's not, a punishing or mean God, and actually I learned a lot about relationship, in some faiths, that's not really focused on a lot. And then in other places, I was, I guess, blessed and I feel very lucky to have been exposed to places where that was the main focus, like building that relationship with your higher power and not following rules or traditions or, like some of the more religious things. So I'm grateful that I was able to be exposed to people like that. And that's kind of what I focus on today, and a lot of it comes through gratitude for me. Today my husband and I were just joking. He's working from home today. I was just upstairs because we always have a lot of things going on in our family. We have 3 teenagers. There's a lot happening here. And we've had a lot of really tough times and we're kind of coming through some different stuff right now. And I said, how are you doing? And he said, I'm focusing on abundance. And I said, okay, good. Because I said to him, I'm always saying we have to stop focusing on the lack and start focusing on the abundance. And instead of listing out all these things that we can't do and we don't get to do, start switching that and be like, you know what? I get to do this. And he goes, I get to sleep in a sleep number bed. And I'm like, exactly. How amazing is that? You have an amazing bed that you get to set on what you want. And so it seems silly, but sometimes I think gratitude is the best way to connect spiritually, particularly when we're in times where maybe we're not feeling it all the way, or maybe we're mad at God, or we just don't want a lot of that. So That's been my experience.
I love that. What you appreciate appreciates. Kind of what we focus on expands. So it's so important too. I was told that if the only prayer you ever say is thank you, then that would be enough.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I want to backtrack just a little bit to kind of establish kind of how we got here, right? You made it to rehab by the time you were 27, which is amazing that you didn't, have to endure a lot of suffering. But I think it's, my intention of this podcast is to help alleviate the suffering. And so I think it's so important for people to be able to identify, what was the pain about? Like, where did the pain, like Gabor Mate, don't ask why the addiction, ask why the pain. And you and I were discussing earlier the trauma, I knew you specialize in trauma and healing, which is, we're going to dive into that too. But tell me a little bit about how we got here and like maybe some of the pain that you were trying to cope with.
Sure. So for me, and like I mentioned to you earlier, and I'll say it now, is that trauma is relative. It is very personal and it's specific to each individual. So what might be very difficult for me and been very traumatic and hard and left a big stain on my brain might have been something that you were able to just kind of brush off and work through on your own. And we're all just wired differently. So it's not to diminish somebody else's or to say mine was better or worse than yours. I actually spent a lot of years doing that when I landed in therapy, when I got sober and was starting to do some of the extra outside work. I spent time saying that to her constantly. My story isn't that bad. I don't have that many things. It's not that big of a deal. And it doesn't really matter, right? I think what I've come to know is none of that really matters. It affected me, and it made my life difficult and made me believe certain things about myself that weren't true. So what that looked like for me was my parents got divorced when I was 5 years old. That was the pivotal. From what I can remember anyway, and what my brain has been able to remember for me so far, is that was the pivotal event in my life. And from there was like a lot of abandonment. My biological father just kind of left us. There was very little contact after the first year or so. He had his own family and his own other children, which we never met. And he lived in our community. And luckily my mom met and married another man who was wonderful and raised us as his own. And we didn't use terms like stepdad and things like that. And I have a brother from him. So, I mean, and I think it was now looking back and after I did the work on that, I could see that was a huge blessing for my biological father to kind of step out and let my stepdad kind of raise us. It eliminated a lot of that divorce stuff that happens. But as a younger self, I don't think I could to do that. I didn't understand that. And so the feelings that were left for me were a lot of like, I'm not good enough. And then that translated later into I'm not pretty enough, smart enough, thin enough, all of the things, right? Not enough was really my trauma. And that just kind of carried through in my younger years through high school. On the outside, I looked, my head's funny. My mom told me a few years ago, one of the neighbors in the neighborhood was like, oh, it was always so cool seeing Shelby. She was so popular. And I was like, what? But I think it's because I was in or involved or around like the quote unquote popular crowd. Obviously, that was the view somebody else had of me, but I never would have been able to articulate that or felt that ever. I played sports, so that was like my main focus, really hard on myself, just never good enough, right? Never amounted to much with that. My grades were just average, so there's just a lot of sort of lack of self-esteem, lack of confidence, and validation. I mean, I came from a different generation. I'm not sure we're probably a similar age. I mean, things were a little different then, like we weren't raised by parents who were emotionally validating us all the time or like meeting all of our needs. Like I was raised outside. I was climbing trees and drinking from hoses, all this typical Gen X stuff, right? And I'm not saying that they're bad. And mine were actually pretty darn good, right? Good at it. So anyway, I think that for me was what sent me down that path of just not feeling ever like enough. And it just manifested itself in a lot of different ways. I had a lot of problems with food and obviously substances. I was a depressive type. So typically I was just always in that down state. I had 2 suicide attempts before I got sober and, a lot of other things, I guess, along the way. Not feeling good enough about myself led me down paths with people that maybe I really shouldn't have been hanging around with, and encounters, particularly in college, with other people that I had no business kind of landing near. And that created a lot of shame and guilt, some of those decisions, and that's my story.
When did you start using?
Actually, I feel like I was a little bit of a late bloomer. I was the oldest of 3 kids, so my parents were pretty strict. So everyone in my family was a very heavy drinker. There's always alcohol around. We were raised with like a kegerator in the house. So like, we were always, I'm not saying they're alcoholic, but there's a lot of heavy drinking and partying and stuff. And so that was always access. But my parents were really, strict. I mean, we had curfews and rules and we weren't to do any of that. And so I think I started experimenting when I was closer to like 16. I remember drinking like a little bit out of the cabinet or whatever. But I started dating my now husband when I was 16, or I was not even 16 yet. And I was always the driver. So I drove those drunk boys around, right? And I was just a, quote unquote responsible one. So a little bit more in my senior year, but definitely by the time I got to college, I was kind of off to the races at that point.
So was it during college that you started having consequences? Because you know how they say it's fun with problems and then just problems.
Right. Yeah.
When did the problems start?
So actually in college, and again, a lot of my stuff was internal. I did not have a lot of external consequences. I didn't have the DUIs or any of that.
Internal was the worst kind.
Internal was the worst kind. I mean, I did silly things like back in my day, we had to use calling cards, right? Because there was long distance and I went to school in North Carolina and I lived in Maryland. So my husband was at a school in Maryland. So I would get drunk and go to people's houses and parties and call him and run up their long distance. So that's not nice, and then somebody caught on to me. They're like, where's that Maryland girl? Like they caught on to it. And then I stopped doing that. But I didn't have a lot of those consequences. It was very internal. Before I left that school, I had that first suicide attempt, which nobody even knew about. I just kind of woke up and was on my own with that. I transferred schools for my second 2 years, and there things got much worse. A lot of the perfectionism started, a lot of the food problems started, a lot of very, very just mean to myself, very cruel. Had to get straight A's, all these different things started. So those kinds of consequences. I went to grad school not too long after. I surprisingly did very well until my very last. I graduated from graduate school in May of 2002. I got sober in July. So surprisingly, I did very well. I don't know how that happened. I was nuts. I just was really, really crazy. And so there was consequences, like socially, I was embarrassing. We would go to events at for my husband's work, and I would be like falling down drunk. We would go to concerts. Like I remember being at a Jimmy Buffett concert that I don't remember being at all. And stuff like that. I mean, it was just always very obvious that like something was not okay with me. My mom would like lecture me, be like, okay, now when you go out with Ryan to this Christmas party or whatever, make sure you don't drink too much, stuff like that. And then it wasn't until the very end. I mean, the end of this is like the opening story of my book, right? I mean, I was at a big conference for social workers and teenagers, worked for social services at the time. And I got drunk and something happened. Some things happened overnight and I wasn't even aware, but I was a blackout drinker. And I was called out of that conference by Washington, D.C. police and, questioned.
The police?
And, yeah.
Okay, when you say you're glassing over some very big things. So something's happened.
Something has happened.
Could you elaborate as much as you're comfortable with?
Sure. Yeah. So something happened. I don't even know. I don't have any recollection of what it was that happened.
When the police addressed you, what were they talking about?
Right. So basically they just said that somebody accused me of something and they interrogated me, and I spent 45 minutes on that video interrogation explaining to them how I know that didn't happen because I wasn't drunk, and I know when I'm drunk and I wasn't drunk. And it was a whole thing, and it was
all in blackout.
Yeah, potentially career ending, and so I had to spend lots of money and time getting a fancy attorney and going to trial. All of that was able to work out, but it was huge at the time. So that was my big consequence. Luckily, I was able to keep my job and continue to carry on, and I have a license and different things now.
And so that story is in your book, Recovering in Recovery.
Yeah,
that's the name of your book.
Yes,
so, throw that out there.
Thank you.
Get that in there. Can you tell me a little bit more about the food problems? Was it on like the bulimia scale, or I don't, could you elaborate a little about that?
Yeah, sure. So I had all of those things, right? So I was basically big time into restriction, like calorie restriction. I also did binge and purge. I discovered laxatives, which I know is kind of gross, but like, so it was not a consequence.
So common.
Horrible I did. I used to steal them from the grocery store. I would take them out of the boxes and like leave the boxes on the shelf and stick them in my pocket. I guess I probably didn't have any money. I was young and I was embarrassed or whatever. And so that's not a very nice thing to do. So yeah, I did a lot of that, a lot of just obsessive and compulsive around food. And I was always an athlete. So I was an athlete even in college. I was on the crew team. So we were working out a lot. And so I always had that in my back pocket too. And just really unhealthy. It's very...
I find it so... over the time that I've been doing interviews and in recovery as well, so many women, the food issues are heavily infused in their experience. It's love, it's food, it's, drugs and alcohol. And it's all an attempt to mitigate these painful feelings that we don't have coping skills for. It's kind of what it boils down to.
Yeah. I mean, the eating disorders are all in the addiction category, and obviously they're not about the food, right? They're more about control and also that numbing out, which is what we're all trying to do with substances. So if you're kind of have a substance abuse bent, right, there's very much likely that you're going to have some of these other tools. And that's why when we get sober, we have to be cautious. These things don't go away.
Right.
I've had problems with food in the last 4 years, and I talk about all that in the book as well. Just the challenges that we've had in parenting over the last 4 or 5 years has been tremendously stressful and emotional. And so the food issues went the other way. Now I started emotionally eating and just not taking care of myself with the way I always was very good at. So I have to be cautious about when we step into some of those patterns, we know what it's about. It's about numbing out.
When we step into those patterns, there's typically some sort of stressor that triggers that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Teenagers are hard. Being a mom is hard.
Yeah.
Being alive is hard.
Being alive is hard. Yeah. I just said that. I said that yesterday to somebody. I said, I think the bottom line is life is hard for most people. Yeah. And some of us get dealt a really bad hand and some of us get dealt a better hand, but it's still hard for everybody.
Yeah, you're right, though. You said it earlier, pain is relative.
Mm-hmm.
So you ended up in rehab at 27. At this point, you had known your husband for 11 years. Is that right? So you guys, what happened? What was did you have like a moment of clarity? Did you have a bottom? How did you land in rehab?
Well, that situation that I just explained in DC was the bottom. That was the moment of
Oh,
clarity for everybody. And so once we
for
met with the
everybody.
attorney, yeah, except me, they felt that
Okay.
it was best for me to go to treatment. And so that's what I did. And yeah, that was the beginning of the next phase.
So tell me about your experience in rehab.
My experience was very positive, I would say, except for the fact that I didn't really believe that I needed to be there for the first couple weeks, right? Like I said, I was fortunate to be able to be in a beautiful place that we had to pay for because my insurance company didn't think I was bad enough. But it was positive, we had like a lot of group therapy, and my husband and I think my parents too participated in the family program that they offered. So that was kind of cool. What I love about treatment is it just gives you that. It's sort of like well, two things. One, it gets you out of your environment. So like you're completely removed from your environment, even if it's not quote unquote toxic, it's still, there are things in our environment that aren't healthy for us at first. And then also you get that education, like you get education around what addiction is, what it isn't, how to treat it, all of the things versus, we get all that in 12 step too, but it just takes a lot longer, so you get like this burst of, this is what's going on, it's like a big injection kind of recovery. So it was very positive. I met some good people. Two of the women I still kind of keep in touch with, sometimes loosely today.
You're still connected with them.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you had sort of like a denial phase in the first 2 weeks, and then you had like this idea that you could surrender to your higher power, because I think you said because you didn't have another choice, or you didn't
Yeah,
know
I
what else
think
to do.
I felt like I didn't have another choice, and that denial phase lasted a lot longer than 2 weeks. Actually, it continued on, I would say, for the next 18 months, 12 to 18 months. Frankly, when I sat in meetings and said, I don't need to be here, I don't belong here, but I came because I was too scared not to, and I was told by then you're hearing enough stories, right? You're hearing
Right.
enough people share, and the consequences are very real. And I was scared, and I really wanted my life to kind of be repaired. I wanted my husband to stay. I wanted to continue to be able to live my life. And so I kept coming back, like I said, but I didn't really accept it for a long time.
Point where you finally came like that, it sank from your head to your heart that, yeah, I am. Did you like say, yes, I'm an alcoholic, or you admitted to your innermost self that
I think
this
it
was
was
a problem?
gradual. I think it was more gradual. I didn't think I had like a lightning bolt moment of that. I think it was just over time, there was a loosening of the grips, of the chains that were kind of keeping me away from truly saying, this is who I am and what I am. And I just had to keep coming back, and I had to listen to the other women. I was also afforded the opportunity to be with women in like small groups, kind of like in home groups, basically. So some of the women would have like these women's meetings, and we would come and like eat food and hang out. And it was a really special thing. I was able to get, because I wasn't really good at connecting with women. I didn't have really didn't have close friends. And so that was hard for me. So this was a great opportunity to be able to say like, oh, actually I can commune with other women, and I can share and learn to trust. And so I think over time, I think really God just opened up my heart and my mind to who I really am and what I am. And that acceptance came.
And that you mentioned not having great relationships with women. I had that same experience, and I know a lot of women do too, is where we don't trust other women and it's hard to connect. And they do say in the rooms that, you hear that the women work with the women, and it's not
Mhm.
law, but I recommend that. But yeah, how did your relationship with women change over the years?
Um, that's an interesting question, and I feel like it's evolved and ebbed and flowed throughout. I talk a lot about this in the book too. So,
Okay.
because so I got sober, then I was pregnant. 6 months later, I was pregnant, and then another 9 months later, was pregnant with my second kid. So I had three kids in 4 years, right? So I got pregnant at 6 months. And then I had 3 kids in 4 years, which I don't recommend. That was hard. I'm glad that I had them, but it was like, you're kind of doing some of that backwards. Like I couldn't really 100% focus on my true recovery because all I want to do is have a baby. Right. So, so then I was immersed in the mommy world, which mommy sober 15 years ago or 20, 18 years ago is not the same as it is today. So sobriety wasn't like fashionable. It wasn't like a thing. So there was a lot. And plus I was raised in AA, right? So so anonymity was drilled into my heart and mind. Like I believed that was the way we were supposed to be. And I was just a girl who was just seeking connection that was authentic and raw and true. That's all I ever wanted. And I just could never find that. The women that I hung out in the gym because that's where I felt most comfortable. My kids went to preschool there. I share a lot about this. Like the women there were, fancy, and we were like the daytime crowd because we were stay-at-home mommies, and they wore lipstick and matching outfits and all kinds of cool stuff. And I was just like coming in with my double stroller crying, and I just couldn't figure out like why they all had us together, why their kids were all dressed in the same clothes and they were clean and they had lipstick on. And I was like literally crying. And maybe they were medicated. I don't know. But I struggled because I wanted to fit in. It was like being a teenager, right? It was basically like going back to high school. Like I wanted to fit in with these women, and I would press to like make myself fit into this group that I really didn't belong in. And they didn't really want me, and they weren't mean people. They were great people, I guess. They were good for each other or for other people, but they weren't the best people for me, and I don't know why I was trying to be in a group that I didn't fit. Right. And there was times that were fun and we had some moments or whatever, our kids were friends, but it took me a long time. Cause I guess what I realized was, I tell the story too about going to play dates, with some of my mom friends. And I wanted to talk about real stuff. Like I wanted to be able to say like, I hate my husband, or my kid is making me crazy, or they're being an a-hole. And I remember one time saying something along those lines or something and getting like the kind of glassy eyed stares, like shocking looks, like, oh, we don't do that here, and I was like, oh, okay. We don't talk about that here. So to me, that was a struggle, just being able to find places and spaces that were safe to be very honest. And to be honest, I still struggle with that. I mean, that's still a thing. I mean, I think a lot of people don't want to be at that level of truth. And I'm not saying you bear all your things all the time. Of course, there's some things that are private or that we don't share. But then again, I'm like, really, are some things private? I mean, shouldn't I be able to share from the depths of my soul about the challenges I'm having with my child, with my friend? Like, is there something I should hold back? I shouldn't be able to say this thing because it's embarrassing or for whatever reason. No, I don't think so. But I think a lot of other people do think so. And
I think those are the people who are not in recovery.
I think that's true.
People are uncomfortable. People not in recovery a lot of people are uncomfortable with their own feelings. So they don't want to hear it from you.
I think it's very true. And I don't have a lot of friends in recovery. I really don't.
Well, there you go. You need more friends in recovery.
I know the women around here, there's not a lot of women. And maybe now that I'm older, there would be women my age, but most of the women when I got here were older. They weren't new mommies. There was no relatability. So I didn't really seek it there. I bet you now I could probably find a bunch more, but they don't want to be truth tellers.
Yeah, it's so funny. When I first got sober, we were all like so in touch with our pain and vulnerable and transparent and sharing all the painful stuff that I found that I was like almost incapable of small talk after that. Cause people from meetings, we'd get together and we'd just like get right into it, and just dissect every thought and feeling and nuance. And after a while I'd hang out with people that weren't sober and I'd be like, I don't know what to say to you. Cause you're right. A lot of times they want to talk about the weather or things I just had no interest in at all.
Yeah, that's been my experience too. I mean, I have one pretty good friend now who we've known each other a long time, and there's been a trust there that's developed. And sometimes we see each other often, and sometimes we go through periods of kind of not, because she has 3 kids as well. And, I do feel very comfortable. Like I just saw her this morning for a walk, and we're sharing the stuff, like we're in it, and I love that. But then I have some others that I've had to learn, I think with my older age, to kind of let go of, or just create some healthy boundaries around where I wasn't continuing, because I started to do some of that seeking again. I was sort of pressing, and I'm like, wait, that's not who we are today. I've met some other really lovely women, like actually very God-centered, faith-based women recently that God has really placed in my life that I've been super thankful for, because I felt like that is almost similar to recovery. Like those women, the ones that I've met anyway, and they have real problems. Like some of them are, going through some real serious stuff. And you don't think like, oh, here's this super strong Christian family and her husband is doing some shenanigans, or here's this super strong Christian family and their kid is, smoking weed in the bathroom, like whatever. And so I'm like, I had been kind of praying, asking God to send me some new friends. I really was the last couple of years. Yeah. And my therapist said that to me one time. I remember sharing some of these stories with her, and she said, you need some new friends. And I'm like, you're right. But like, where do I find them? Where are such women, And so I started, praying a little bit about that. And I was able to meet, I have 2 new ones, a couple of new ones actually. And I'm like, okay, wow, this is how it works. So now I have a few that I've really been building and focusing my attention on, and kind of loving on them in their time of need, and allowing them to just kind of listen to me too. And that's been cool.
That's beautiful. Yeah. We all need friends that we can just be our authentic self with, people who can get real. Yeah. I don't really have a lot of patience for that superficial stuff. Just mostly because I'm high maintenance. That's just
You're not.
With the time that we have left, I'm curious. I know you were a social worker. How long were you a clinical social worker for?
Well, I still am. I graduated from my master's degree in social work in 2002. I worked in social services for a little while, and then I went in private practice. But then I stayed home. When I had my 3rd kid, I had to stay home. And then I started, when he was getting older, I started to build up and get credentialed in my insurance companies and start my own practice and things like that. So I guess I've been in practice for about, I don't know, it's 7 or 8 years on my own. And I do EMDR therapy, which is a neurologically based form of trauma treatment that helps
movement desensitization
and reprocessing.
Thank you.
So that's the primary modality I use in my practice. So,
oh my God, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I experienced EMDR probably in the last couple of years. Whoa. I'm all about neuroscience, reprogramming your default mode network, your brain's operating system, and all the different modalities. So, people that come in, I'm really curious about, I'm sure you've seen this a lot over the years, people that have pervasive, persistent, repetitive trauma, sexual abuse, physical abuse over their childhood. These people grow up to be adults who not only have that deep-seated belief of, not good enough, but it's like, they're reliving, creating their family of origin dynamics in their adult life. And I'm like, what are the ways that people can sort of reframe those traumatic experiences? Can you just walk me through a little bit about what EMDR is and how you see it as, how does it benefit people with sort of that persistent abuse?
Sure. Yeah. So EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And it is a neurologically based form of trauma treatment that helps us to reprocess those disturbing events. So typically what happens is that as we experience life, we are all exposed to different kinds of trauma. And whether it's, some of us have those big capital T traumas, we all have the lowercase t trauma, sometimes just watching the news or experiencing, comments. Things can be traumatic, right? And about 70% of the time, our brains kind of experience that stuff, take it all in and process through it properly. We feel the feelings, we kind of move on and everything works out just fine. About 30% of the time, those things don't get processed properly by the brain. And then they get stuck in that back part of our brain, which is the hippocampus or reptilian part of the brain, where they get stuck. And then what we call negative beliefs about ourselves get formed and kind of attached to those experiences. Things like, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm a failure, I should have done more, it's my fault, I'm not safe, all those kinds of things. They get attached there and then they kind of stay there and thread throughout the rest of our lives, affecting our relationships, our ability to work, feel confident, function as an adult, all these kinds of things. So what EMDR does is we kind of take an inventory, I guess, of those negative beliefs and the traumas that we get attached to those. And that becomes our working treatment plan. So we use what's called bilateral stimulation. Sometimes people use eye movement, where you're literally following your fingers, left, right, left, right. Sometimes you can use tapping on your tops of your thighs, or I use these little paddles you hold in your hand that vibrate back and forth. I also use headphones that go sound back and forth. Because the more modalities that we can add in now, they're saying is the better for the trauma reduction. And basically, you're thinking about the target that we just set up, and your brain does all the work. So you can't do it wrong. I can't really do it wrong. I can do things to make it better. I can enhance it, but there's really nothing either one of us can do that's going to hurt you or make it worse. So basically your brain does all the work using the bilateral stimulation to process through the trauma and basically heal that neural pathway that got formed by that trauma, and then begin to rewrite a new one. And when we're at the end, we're basically reprocessing that entire trauma and then restoring it in the front part of our brain, which is a much more cognitive, rational part of our brain. And we store it with a positive belief. So what do we believe about ourselves now? When we think back on that, it might be, well, I am good enough, or, it wasn't my fault, or, I'm worthy and capable, or I'm lovable, whatever the person says at the time. So it doesn't give you amnesia. You don't forget about the things, but you certainly do reduce the emotional stimulation you have when you were to think back on that. Or if something in the future were to come up that's very similar or is going to create the same kind of experience, that experience is going to be way less.
Right. So I was thinking, when I went through that experience, I went to see somebody, and she asked me about a couple of specific. She asked me to practice being in a safe place, like visualizing. So I picked, created an image of a safe place and feeling there. And I think I had some things I would say to myself of feeling safe and secure and associating it with this place. And then we would talk about the event. I experienced sexual abuse when I was very young. And so it was like talking about that. And then I would hold the little pods. Like it was a while ago. So I think I talked about the experience, and then she had me hold the pods and think about my safe space. Does that sound like the protocol? Or am I confusing it?
Well, we use the safe space as the way we were taught, I was taught, was the safe places are very important. It's like a resource. So that's like basically a coping skill almost. So I use the safe. We think about the trauma the whole time you're using the tappers or the headphones. So while you're while you're doing BLS, you're going back to the event, whatever that was set up for you. Bilateral stimulation.
Got it. Okay.
So left, right, left, right, left, right.
Yeah.
So you're thinking about the event, your brain is doing all the work for you. When they're turned off, you say in one sentence or less what you noticed during that pass. So you might notice thoughts, feelings, or images or body sensations, and then they go back on. There's no talking in between the therapist, or shouldn't be, and the client, because it interrupts the processing and it gets you in that front part. So you just keep going. So you're going to do that entire process for the entire whatever minutes you have. At the end, if you're still like at a 5 or more or higher, or you're really stimulated, you use that safe place activity with a guided meditation to kind of calm it down, put everything away, close it up so you can go out into the world.
Right. Start to deregulate a little bit.
Yeah.
So the facilitator or therapist isn't talking, but they prompt you as to what to do when, right?
No.
I wouldn't just go in the office and you wouldn't hand me a couple of paddles.
Well, right.
Okay, go.
You set it up. You set up all those targets. You make that
Right.
list of disturbing events. That's your treatment plan. And then you say, okay, today we're going to start focusing on your childhood sexual abuse. What's the worst part now when you think back on that? Well, I can see his face. Okay, so you're even thinking about his face. What's the negative belief you have when you think back on that? I'm not safe. Okay, so that's your target. And that's what you're thinking about the whole time. And so, yes, then you're thinking about that. The therapist shouldn't be talking other than to say, wow, you're doing a great job. Keep going. Notice that. Feel that. Where can you feel it in your body?
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, that's really important. That sort of redirecting back to where's the experience in your body? How are you feeling? Where are you at on the pain scale? And then, so is the goal to then by the end of the session, take that painful experience down from like a 10 to a 5? Would that be considered? I mean, that's progress. But is there a goal?
Well, the goal is to get to zero.
Get to zero. Okay.
But usually it takes 3 or 4 sessions for most people to get to zero. It depends on the way your brain processes things. Everybody's different.
And would you say that, people with pervasive experience, like years of abuse, are they able to achieve that zero? Because what I have seen, and in some of the hypnotherapy clients that I see, is that some people have such deep trauma that it takes a lot of work to sort of be able to get them to the place where they don't experience, like people come to me for like anxiety, like social anxiety, or they're acting out with food or shopping still. What do you typically see in those cases? What is your success rate for those people too?
Well, the success rate for EMDR is extremely high when it's done well. And so you have to if you're not getting results, then you're not getting to the core issue. So most of the stuff that we're experiencing in our current life or recent past doesn't just show up. You didn't just develop an I'm not good enough feeling because you had a car accident and you made a mistake. That's not where that came from. That came from someplace way back. So if you're working on a recent event and it's not getting to zero, that's because there's a feeder event. There's other things that are way in your history that are feeding that event today that are not cleared out. So yes, the research would say it is very, very possible to clear all that out. But if you're not going all the way back, and sometimes this is not consciously available to us, so we have to, as clinicians, continue to kind of press, dig in, ask your brain to come on, reveal more to us as we're doing this work. When was the first time you can remember feeling that way? When is the first time you can remember ever feeling anxiety? Well, I can remember when I went to kindergarten and I had to leave my mom and she left without letting me hug her for the second time and I cried the whole day. I mean, okay, that doesn't seem significant, but as a 5-year-old, that is, and it left a trauma stain on their brain. So if you can't get to some of that first and worst stuff, you're not going to have a lot of, you'll get some relief, but you're not going to get full.
Yeah, no, that's, I think that's really an art to be able to get people to that first initializing event. I do that a lot with hypnotherapy, with age regression. Have you tried age regression?
No.
It's super good.
Yeah.
Check it out. I like trying all the things. If I hear about something, I'm trying it.
That's right. That's awesome.
Yeah. Tell me, I know you need to probably wrap this up. Tell me, how can people get a hold of you if they have questions about maybe the work you do, they want to work with you and maybe use you as a resource? What's the best way to people get a hold of you?
Sure. So I have I have a website. I have 2 websites. Actually, I have a website, shelbyjohncoaching.com is where you can find all of my coaching courses. My book is available there. My podcast is featured right on that homepage. You can kind of see all the cool things that I'm doing online. I have a therapy website too. That's just my name, shelbyjohn.com. So if you wanted to learn more about EMDR or just therapy in general, I'm licensed in Maryland and Florida. So those are the 2 states that I can practice therapy in, but people can come to me if they're like in the surrounding areas. I also do now what's called EMDR intensives. That's on that website as well. So that's basically EMDR for multiple hours and sometimes multiple days at a time. So you can do full or half day and multiple days. So you're doing a lot of therapy at one time. It's not better treatment. It's just a lot faster because you're not doing a week to week model. So for those people who might be interested in kind of getting into it, maybe you did have a recent event, or maybe you're trying to get back to work, or you're struggling with something right now and you're like, man, I just want to get in there. You could do an EMDR intensive with me or someone else closer to you, to do like a multi-day approach to your trauma and kind of get you kind of up and running. You can then gradually get into a week to week model if you wanted to after that, but you're basically front loading your therapy.
Right.
That's a cool option.
Quick fix.
Yeah, that's a cool option.
Let's get this done quick.
Yeah. So again, I mean, I'm in Maryland and also Florida. So those are two places where you can do therapy.
Do you do any remote coaching?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. I just want to make sure that there's people listening from all over.
So I can coach anybody in the world. Coaching is not the same thing as therapy, but therapy in my license, I'm licensed in Maryland and Florida. So if you're in Maryland or Florida, I can virtually work with you, or you can come to me. Yeah. Coaching, I can do anywhere in the world.
That's awesome. Well, Shelby, it was such a pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you so much for all that you shared. And I look forward to connecting with you in the future.
Oh, me too. Thanks so much for having me.
Have a great day.
You too.